It's a privilege to be with you. For those of you who don't know what Life Keys is, it's a series of restorative courses that we developed in our church in Mount Evelyn. And now they've spread all over the world in over 23 countries. And while on our website it says 2,300 churches, we know there are more than 10,000 churches in Russia alone that do Life Keys. 5 of the courses are in Russian. And they're in places all over the world. Why? Because people need help. They don't need just help with faith issues, they need help with life issues. Yeah. And so 15 of our courses deal with issues of life. Last term, we had Mastering Your Money, which was so wonderfully led by Mike DeGama, and I renamed one of the other, I called him Stephen Chu. I know it's Dennis, but I renamed him. And I think it's a much better name for him. I've encouraged him to stick with it. And they did such a good job in teaching people how to budget, how to save money, how to get out of debt, and how to be able to honour God and their family as they build a great life. Do you know most people have never had an ounce of teaching on that? I taught subjects on those subjects for 7 years in high school and still didn't have a budget till my pastor taught me to budget, changed my life. We also did a course on marriage. We rewrote our course called Making Marriage Better. And it was out of that course I want to speak to you today because it just stirred my heart so much. Now this term we are running 3 different courses. The first is our training course called Small Group Leader and Facilitator Training. We believe for revival in Australia. As people come flooding into the church in the days, months and years ahead, they will not all turn up here with their lives sparkling, wonderfully functional. They will come with more kinds of challenges than you can imagine, and not all of them will be resolved by the power of God. Many of them will be resolved in a process of walking with God. And as a result, you need people to help struggling people do that walk. And that's what our small group leader and facilitator training is all about. Training people how to help people do the journey of a restorative experience with Jesus. 6 weeks, it starts on October the 3rd. As they'll tell you later, there's a QR code on the back of your seat. If you scan that, it will take you to the Life Keys bits as well as other things, and you'll find the small group leader there, the training there. And we would love, if you have a heart to be part of the restoring process, we can show you how and harness you to the Life Keys ministry. Secondly, Valiant Man. We promised this term we would do Valiant Man, and because just of issues that I can't talk to you about today, I can't do it on a Tuesday night, but I want to do it. So I'm going to do it on a Saturday morning by Zoom. Any of the men who want to do Valiant Man, I will take you through it. You do the stream, you stream the teaching in your own time. I meet with the group on Saturday morning, 8 a.m. in the morning, and for an hour every week, and I'll coach you through 10 weeks of talking to men about restoring and empowering their spiritual and their moral strength. In a highly pornified world, men need help. Women need help too. They don't need as much help as men. Men need lots more help. And as a result, the Valiant Man course is restoring and fortifying the moral and spiritual integrity of men. I will not only coach you for 10 weeks with the teaching, I'll meet with you every morning for 63 days by video on your phone or on your computer, and I will coach you into a healthier life. Thirdly, we're going to run an experiment in term 4. I've been asked many times, when are you going to create Valiant Man for younger men? And it's desperately needed. In fact, when we decided to do this, then I got an email this week from Pennsylvania. They've been running the course amongst the Mennonites in Pennsylvania, and they said, you're going to create one for young men? We said, we talked about it this week, it's going to happen. We're going to run a pilot program just for 4 weeks. Now it's to take the big issues of Valiant Man, but to bring it down to the age of younger guys, and we'll take them on from 12 years and older, and parents can come as well, because parents need to hear what we have to say. The reality is that there is a window in the training of the masculine brain. It's from the ages of 10 to 14. After this, the brain begins to prune the branches and things you begin to be left with the brain you're going to have to do life with. And while you can change that and this plasticity, the really big formative stage is between the ages of 10 and 14. And in a highly pornified world, young men need help to understand the importance of building a brain that will assist them in walking with the Word of God and the Spirit of God. You don't need the hardware of your brain being another problem. There's enough problems in life without having the hardware messed up. Anyone who's ever tried to run a computer with a messed up motherboard will understand it's not easy to get any good program to run on a messed up motherboard. God will help you build the brain that will cooperate with both the Word and the Spirit, and we'll be going to do that in term 4 for years 12 years and older, and parents can come as well. You just have to set up the back, and we'll have a special small group for you, and we'll talk about things that will change the minds of young men, give them a better start in life. After we've done the pilot program, we'll then reassess how that has gone and develop it out to a 6-week course that will be more of one we will then craft and make available to the wider church from out of Numa Life Keys. Okay. Today, because of my heart was stirred during our Making Marriage Better. People need help with life, and they need help with relationships. And today I want to talk to you about learning to love imperfect people, because it's one of the most significant challenges of your life. And I was stirred this week out of the Making Marriage Better course to pluck one of the issues that is so central to building in a healthy life and share it with you today. And I was encouraged by Matthew chapter 13, where Jesus said, every scribe who has been trained for the kingdom of heaven is like the master of a house who brings out of his treasure things that are new and things that are old. I'm going to share with you something that's old today. This is not a new message. In many ways, it's probably my life message. And as a result, I'm going to remind you of it. If you were at South 2 weeks ago, I preached it there. I'm have pulled it out of the cupboard and said, this needs to be heard again. So today I'm going to talk to you about learning to love imperfect people. And one of the most important things to understand is the experience you have had in your own home goes to the roots of both the strengths in your life and the problems you are facing in your life. And if you want a great example of it, just come to Noah. How many people have ever heard of the biblical Noah, the man in the book of Genesis, Noah? Put your hand up if you've heard about Noah. Good, most of you have. Those who didn't raise your hand, the elders will be coming to your house this afternoon, and they're going to explain Noah and the ark to you, because we wouldn't want you to miss out on that. It'd be an awful thing if you did. At the end of Noah's life, everybody else was dead. God wiped the slate clean. And the only ones who were left at the end of Noah's life were his wife, his 3 sons, their wives, and Noah himself. And the question would be, well, how come Noah? Why did God choose Noah and not somebody else? Great question. Difficult questions are answered in the Bible. Read your Bible. And in Genesis chapter 6, we hear the scriptures explaining why God chose Noah out of all the men he could have chosen. The Bible says this, now Noah was a good man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God. 3 things, good man, righteous man, faithfully walked with God. Well done, Noah, good man. Now it must have been marvelous to have this man for your husband. If you'd married anyone else, you were dead. Must have been great to have this man for your father. How wonderful to get up every morning and say, Dad, ooh, Dad, thank you, Dad. You were such a good man. You were a righteous man. You walked faithfully with God. And if it wasn't for you, Dad, we'd all be toast. Question. If it was such a blessing to have this man for your dad, how come 3 chapters down the Bible, one of these very fortunate boys ends up being cursed? Great question. Answers to difficult questions are answered in the Bible. Genesis chapter 9, how come he ended up cursed? Because Noah was a man of the soil. And he proceeded to plant a vineyard, and when he drank some of its wine, he became drunk and lay uncovered inside his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father naked and told his two brothers outside. Oh, boys, Dad is lying round in the nutty. He exposed his father to ridicule. But Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it across their shoulders. Then they walked in backwards and covered their father's naked body. Their faces were turned the other way so that they would not see their father naked. And when Noah awoke from his wine and found out what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves will he be to his brothers." So why did this boy end up being cursed? Well, it's because his father was a bad man. You see, it's a bad man that gets so drunk he doesn't know if his clothes are on or off. But did you notice it wasn't Noah who ended up cursed? It was his son, because his son encountered the inexplicable, imperfect behavior of his own father, but he didn't handle it appropriately. And he was the one who paid the price. Now, if this was the only time this appeared in the Bible, you could just pass it off as just another story. It's not a principle, it's just a story. But when it appears over and over in the Bible, it's no longer a story, now it's a principle. Because the Bible says, out of the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, let a thing be established. And I want to establish something with you today. There is a way that the world works. There's a way that life works. And one of the great challenges of being a human being, it is a spectacular privilege to be a human being. You are not an animal, you are a human being. But with that privilege comes profound responsibility. And one of your responsibilities is that you are living in a spiritual universe, not just a universe made of atoms and molecules. And in this spiritual environment, you have the power to build a life or destroy it. And when you are ignorant, the Bible says we are alienated from the life of God through ignorance. You've got to understand how the kingdom works. You've got to understand how life works. And it's not all just about understanding the natural issues. You've got to understand the spiritual issues as well. And right here, we're dealing with a profound spiritual issue. Now, it flows over into another book. In the Bible, the book of 2 Samuel has a hero at the center of it. The book of 2 Samuel is largely following the life of King David. David, the man after God's own heart, the great hero of the Old Testament, the great king who even gives his title to Jesus, who as the King of Kings is also described as the son of David. Great man. Now in chapter 1, David hears that King Saul has finally been slain on the battlefield. So how does he respond to the news that the guy who's been trying to murder him for decades is finally dead? Does he dance on his grave? Woohoo, woohoo, the wicked king is dead. He doesn't do that. He writes a song of lament. How are the mighty fallen? And he honors the death of a murderous king. Because David's a good man. In chapter 2, the tribe of Judah come to David and say, David, we think you should be the king over our whole tribe, and David is anointed the king of Judah. In chapter 3, David begins his family. A little different than the average family because David has 6 wives, but what a man he is. Every one of these wives starts popping out sons, one after another. 6 wives, 6 firstborn sons. Wife number 1 produces Amnon. Wife number 3 produces Absalom. And these 6 amazing boys are growing up in the life of a national hero. How fortunate to be the sons of David. Well, in chapter 4, David punishes the murderers of Saul's son Ishbosheth. In chapter 5, the whole nation come to David and say, David, you shouldn't just be king over one tribe. You should be king over all of Israel. And in chapter 5, he's crowned the king of Israel. And finally, David captures the Jebusite stronghold that we now know as Jerusalem. He finally captures it after 400 years of holding out as a stronghold in the middle of Israel. In chapter 7, God comes to David and says, chapter 6. In chapter 6, David brings the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem and establishes Jerusalem as the center of worship in Israel. In chapter 7, God comes to David and says, David, you're such a good man. I'll make a promise to you. There is going to be a king reigning on the throne of Israel, and he's going to come right out of your body, and he's going to reign forever and ever. And that's Jesus, the son of David. In chapter 8, He has one victory after another. In chapter 9, he discovers that Mephibosheth is still alive, the grandson of Saul. What are we going to do? A remnant of the old order. Let's kill him. Oh no, David's a good man. Brings the boy into his family, treats him like a son. In chapter 10, David defeats the Ammonites. Is there nothing this good man cannot do? Chapter 11, bad day in the office. He spots the neighbour's wife having a bath, invites her over for a game of chess. Turns into a very vigorous game of chess, gets the neighbour's wife pregnant. Not good. Well, what do? Bring the neighbour's husband home from the war. He'll sleep with his wife. No one will ever know whose kid this is. But here is a man so loyal to David, he is not prepared to spend one night with his wife while men under his command are risking their lives on a battlefield. He sleeps on David's doorstep. How do you repay a man for that kind of loyalty? You murder the guy. And you would have to say murder and adultery is not a good mark for a man who's described as a man after God's own heart. What is that? You see, it's a paradox. It's a contradiction that you can have a man this good and this bad in the same package, but that's what you get with people. In chapter 11, chapter 12, Nathan the prophet comes, puts his finger in David's face and says, "You, sir, are a bad man." Watch it spill over into his family. Chapter 13, David's eldest son gets the hots for Tamar, his half-sister, drags the girl into his bed and rapes her. What's Daddy going to do about that? Well, it's not easy for Daddy to discipline the eldest son for rape when he's just been exposed publicly as an adulterer and a murderer. Daddy does nothing. But the girl has a big brother. He waits for 2 years for Daddy to sort out the family crisis, decides to solve the problem himself, murders his brother and skips town. One dead son. Now, what's Daddy going to do about that? Well, Daddy does nothing. He's paralysed because of his own behaviour. The boy is waiting for a phone call from Dad that never comes. After years, he begins to agitate amongst his father's friends to be allowed to come back to Jerusalem. David gives him permission to come back to Jerusalem, but never makes that phone call. It drags on for another 2 years. And finally, this kid is so angry at his dad, he's burning things down. Finally, they have this conversation, but it's too late. In chapter 15, that young boy is standing in the gates of Jerusalem saying to anyone who's prepared to listen, "Would that I was king in Israel." In chapter 16, he goes for his father's throat. And in chapters 15, 16, 17, the entire nation is thrown into civil war, and they are some of the worst years of David's life. But in chapter 18, that young man, Absalom, is now hanging by his hair from a tree with 3 javelins sticking out of his chest, and his father is in an upstairs room sobbing his heart out. "Oh, Absalom, my son, would that I could have died for you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." What is that? That is a paradox. But did you notice it's not David who's dead? It's 2 of his sons. Because as they saw their father's imperfect world, they did not respond to it appropriately, and it was the boys who paid the price. Now, God knew that this would be true. God knew that we would be profoundly impacted by our family of origin. You see, God has woven into our brains mirror neurons. It's one of the reasons why it's possible for us to be socialized and why it's possible to learn so much, because mirror neurons fire when we hear and see others. It's as if we're doing it ourselves. It's what makes pornography so dreadfully a power form of education in the negative. We have them in our brain, and if you want to watch them at work, just watch the development of an infant in the cradle. It's a stunning thing. Learning to speak a language is one of the greatest gifts you have in life, because otherwise with it you just can't communicate. Now, the thing is, I speak English and it's not easy. I tried to learn German in high school, 2 years, textbook experts and dedicated classes. I couldn't buy a tram ticket in Hamburg after 2 years of trying to learn German. But I speak English fine. Well, you must have had a great tutor, Al. I mean, how did it happen? Well, I tell you, my parents, as soon as I was born, they took me to this government institution where these brilliant people, that's not how it happened. All they did is put me in a basket and send me home with my mum and my dad. And the mirror neurons go to work. I'm lying there. I have no idea how I make the distinction between real communication and weird old Uncle Harry going, I have no idea how you work that out. But the mirror neurons go to work, and within months you watch this little brain suck the vibe of the family home, and before you hear it, Mama, Dada, no. Who taught that kid to say no? Oh, he didn't need a teacher, mate. He had you. All he had to do was hang around in your house, and he's been drawing it in, and we do it so precisely. We don't just pick up the big building blocks. I didn't just learn English. I learned English with an Australian accent. So that you can hear a child 2 years old say a single sentence. You can hear if that kid was born in London or in South Africa or in North America or in New Zealand or Australia, because we learn our family of origin so precisely that even that musical lilt we call accent, without even trying, we pick that stuff up and it becomes part of the fabric of who we are. We became what we are one day at a time as we lived in the context of a household of imperfect people, just by the way. And God knew that. God knew that you would be marked for good by the good stuff in your house. Yeah. He knew, unless you're, just a plain old rebel, and even then it gets through. It sneaks through because those little mirror neurons do their work. And he knew that the good stuff in your family of origin would mark you and become part of who you are. God also knew that the inadequacies of your family would mark you, and they would become part of who you are. And as a result, God's got something really important he needs to say to us about how we handle the imperfections of our own parents. God knows that if you don't understand the imperfections that have become part of your life as a result of your own household, you will be repeating them for the rest of your life. And he knew not only that, but he knew that you were going to need a skill. That if you could learn to handle the imperfections of your own mum and dad, there was just a chance that if you happened accidentally to marry an imperfect person, just by accident, you might need those skills to keep your marriage from falling apart. But if you never learned them with your mum and dad, you wouldn't have those skills. And you would enter into a relationship where you're going to need those skills, but you just don't have them. Or did you think perhaps that you would raise kids that would never create a challenge or a problem for you? Did you think perhaps that you would go to work for a boss who would just lie awake at night trying to ensure that the workplace was aligned perfectly with your temperament and personality, so you would never, when you come to work, have to face an emotional or relational challenge of any kind, because the whole place is set up just to match your personal temperament? Is that how it works? Or when you were going to hire someone, that they would come to you and clock on and immediately change into people that totally align themselves with your personality? Or did you think perhaps one day you might go to church, and there in that church the pastor would mystically, marvelously understand every unstated need you have ever had, phone you at just the right time, adjust all his messages to perfectly align with your theology, your understanding, your emotional needs? What an amazing man he will be. Or did you think you would go to a home group and all the people there, especially the home group leader, would lead the group in such a way as just marvelously aligns with your expectations, and you'd never go home and say, I wouldn't have done it that way? Or did you think you would move into a neighbourhood where everybody in your neighbourhood aligns themselves with your personality? What kind of a world do you think you live in? You're going to marry an imperfect person. You're going to raise them in your house. You're going to work for them or they'll work for you. You're going to go to church and meet them there. You'll find them in a small group. And if you never learned how to handle it in your own home, you won't handle it. You'll be banging your head against a brick wall for the rest of your life. And as a result, God knew that. He knew you would have a challenge with that. And as a result, He has some wisdom for you. He's got something to say to you about how you handle the imperfections of your parents to ensure that you will flourish no matter where we put you in this world. How many people would like to hear what God has to say? And just, well, I've nearly got a majority. I love that. I've got a different message if you want it. I don't like to be an undemocratic tyrant. I mean, if we haven't got a 50%, let's do a different message. How many people would like to hear what God has to say? Oh, there we go. That's good. There we go. Don't come to church and be non-responsive or I'll come to your house. Okay. What does God have to say? This is going to be wonderful. You're going to love this because it's a great need. You already know this. I've built a little case. Everybody, no one's sitting there saying, oh, no, I don't believe I'll ever marry someone who's imperfect. There's not one wife here saying that today, I can promise you that. You know you need it. So this is going to be really important. It's going to be wonderful. If you had a little white card and you took it out and write that on it, it would be brilliant because you could put it in your pocket and every time you bump into an imperfect person, you could pull out the card, read, oh, look, there it is again. And of course, one of the disappointments might be when I tell you what God has to say, you might have known it already and that'll be disappointing because it didn't work yesterday. How's it going to work tomorrow? Well, let's find out. Let's hear it. What does God have to say? Lord, what do you have to say? Because I have to meet imperfect people. My wife, oh, she's so imperfect, Lord. I need help. How do I relate well to imperfect people? Well, learn it with your mum and dad. Yes, Lord, what do you want me to do? Here it comes, Exodus 20 and verse 12. You shall honor your father and your mother. Where is the ripple of gratitude running across this assembly today? No, sit there. Oh, yeah, brilliant. Flip. Just when I thought the dude was going to say something useful, he comes out with that nonsense. Honor your father and your mother. Honor your father and your mother. Yeah. Typical Christians. A lot of baloney. Yeah, Bible baloney. Love your mother and your father. If I told my mother and father all the mistakes they made, they couldn't live, they couldn't sleep at night. They'd be lying awake thinking, oh, I did the wrong thing. If I told them all the ways they messed up my life, they'd be slashing their wrists. That's what they'd be doing. Yeah, honour your father and your mother. You know why God's always sticking up for old people? It's because He's the Ancient of Days Himself, that's why. Stick up for the old people. Yeah. Make you sick. Just when I thought that bloke was going to say something useful, out he comes with the old Christian nonsense. You know, if I told my mum and dad, they'd just be, but excuse me, let me draw your attention to something. God didn't say you shall honour your mother and father so your mum and dad can feel good about their parenting skills. It didn't say you shall honour your mother and your father so that they can sleep well at night. He said you shall honour your mother and your father that it may be well with you. God is concerned for you. And He knows if you never learn how to do this, it doesn't matter where we put you in life, it will never go well with you. And you say, oh, that's Old Testament, Al. Yeah, I'm a New Testament Christian. Great, well, I'll give you a New Testament version. Listen to the Apostle Paul when he says this, Ephesians 6. Honour your father and mother, for this is the first commandment with promise, that it may go well with you. And you live long in the land. You have a good life. God does not want you to be a bad example. His desire is that you will flourish and succeed no matter where we put you in life. But if you never learn how to do this, you'll never make it anywhere. Okay, Al. Okay, well, it didn't work for me so far. How's it going to work for me tomorrow? How do I honour someone I don't really like very much? Well, here it goes to the core. If you're going to honour your father and your mother, you've got to understand what the word means. The word kabed, the word honour, means to let something be as heavy or as significant or as weighty as it really is. But you see, it's not just used in the positive. God is not saying to you, I want you to pretend your parents are perfect. I want you to pretend your pastors are perfect, or your leaders, or your boss, or your home group. I want you to pretend leadership are perfect. No, that's not what he's saying. That is not how you honor leadership. Yeah, that's a good thing, because I was a bit worried about that. You know, maybe I thought God was wanting me to pretend I didn't see stuff. You know, I didn't notice that sometimes I'm getting hurt here. No, you see, he didn't want you to be like Sergeant Schultz. He doesn't want you to say, I see nothing, I see nothing. Poor old Ham comes home and finds his dad lying naked and drunk on the floor. What does God want me to do? I see nothing. That is not what he wants you to do. Because your two brothers saw the same thing. But instead of exposing their father to ridicule, they understood how ugly this scene really was. And something redemptive had to happen in this moment, not something that makes the matter worse. And as a result, we've got to understand that this word kabed does not mean to pretend I didn't see anything, or my parents or my leadership is perfect. It means to let their lives be as heavy and significant as they really are, but it's got two sides. This word is used positively and it's used negatively. And on the positive side, you have to understand that God is saying to you, I want you to let the good stuff in this person's life be as good as it really is. Yeah. And then I want you to learn the skill that goes with that, because it's called gratitude. Wow. But here's the deal. Whenever we encounter someone who's imperfect and they do something we don't like, immediately we depreciate all the good stuff. We can figure we got the right to write it off. And if it's sufficiently unsettling for me, I got the right to cancel it altogether. I got the right to view you as if there's nothing good about you. And as a result, I depreciate you, I push you to one side, and now I give myself permission to be rude, to be ugly, to be damaging, to be destructive, even to betray you, because you deserve it. Nothing good about you, really. God says you don't get to do that. You're to honor every person you meet, and you've got to let the good stuff be as good as it is, and you've got to learn to add to that the skill of gratitude, and it's a skill. Do you know why a lot of people come to church and just stand around and never worship? It's because they're not very grateful. And one of the reasons is because they've done exactly the same to God as they did with their dad. Often we work the other way around. You know, we say, oh, you know, you didn't like your dad, and so you don't like God. Sometimes it's the other way around. Sometimes you're just plain old cheesed off at God. Because I prayed and I didn't get what I wanted. Oh, he didn't answer me the way I didn't unfold the way I expected. And you let me down. And as a result, I'm crossing off all the good stuff. I don't care about the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and the life everlasting. Oh, that counts for nothing. I'm not happy with you. And I know how serious that can be. I will never forget my experience, 27 years old, lying in hospital with a burst disc and longing for God to touch me as a miracle. And the power of God was in my room. I turned to one of the guys next to me who was lying there with his leg up in a great splint, with sticks, with bars and wires suspending his leg in midair, and watched him one night as he started to unwrap his leg and tell me, I'm going home. And I pressed the button for the nurse, and the nurse looked and realised what he was doing and screamed and ran off to get help. And he turned over and looked at me and said, you dobbed on me. You dobbed on me. And I said, Satan, I rebuke you in the name of Jesus. And he shook and then said to me, what day is it? I said, it's Thursday. He said, no, what day is it? I said, it's Thursday. He had dropped 2 tabs of LSD and he was freaking out, and he thought he was going to go home, and he was unwrapping his leg from the splint. And he got so freaked out from getting delivered that he said, I don't want to be next to this guy. I want to go into a different room. So I took him in another room. But I was lying there. Wasn't for the lack of the power of God, but I didn't get my miracle. And when I awoke from the operation and I'd had a laminectomy, I was so disappointed in God, I couldn't read my Bible for 6 months. Funny thing is how God used that He'll make all things work together for good. I can't explain to you why I didn't get my miracle. All I know is it didn't happen. And the reality is I was so upset and so hurt, I couldn't read my Bible. And out of that, I got so dry, a whole year of that. And I got to the place one day, I said to God, I'll do anything. It was that drove me to quit my job, go into Bible college, and why I'm in full-time ministry today is because that season of dryness drove me to seek his face. He said, good on you, son. I'll give you something better than the healing. I'll give you a life of ministry. I understand what happens when someone disappoints us, and it can go very to the core of your relationship with God. And you say, you'd let me down, I'm disappointed, I didn't get what I expected. And now I'm crossing off all the good stuff and I haven't got any worship. You see, because you've got to see the good stuff to have gratitude. And it's the gratitude that leads to worship when you've crossed off the good stuff. It's like you've been baptized in lemon juice. As miserable as the day is long. God says you've got to learn a skill. You've got to learn to do it with your imperfect mum and dad. If you can learn to do it there, you'll be able to handle it anywhere. But here's the flip side. He's not saying to you, pretend your mum and dad are perfect. I want you to honor the bad stuff. I want you to see the bad and unhelpful stuff as bad as it really was. Because if you don't, you'll start normalizing it and treating other people as if somehow this is a way to live. It's not the way to live. We have to allow people sometime to make mistakes and see what the mistakes are and let them be as bad as they really are. And it might require some communication. It might require some confrontation. Because God doesn't ask us to paper over the cracks. When the world was lost in sin, God did not paper over the cracks and say, oh, it's all okay with me. He sent Jesus Christ to the cross and there was blood all over the floor in order to reconcile broken humanity to himself. And the Bible says, blessed are the peacemakers. Sometimes you've got to make peace, and sometimes telling the truth is the only way through. By the power of God, he wants you to honor the bad stuff. Let it be as bad as it really was. See it for what it was. Understand the damage that it did. But now you've got to learn a different skill. To this, you've got to add the skill of total forgiveness. And I tell you something, it's got to be learned. And one of the best places is to learn it is with the imperfections of your own mum and your own dad. And by the grace of God, if you learn that skill, you can flourish anywhere you go in life. And Jesus will underline for you how important this is. Because you see, every time we encounter the imperfections of others, we start putting them in the scales of our justice. Jesus said, judge not lest you yourself be judged. For with what judgment you judge, you shall be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. Do you measure out forgiveness in teaspoons or in buckets? Because Jesus said the measure you are developing as you intersect the imperfections of your own brothers and sisters and mums and dads in your own home, as you learn the skill of measuring things out and telling the truth, you are building for yourself a destiny and a future. Because Jesus said that's the dynamic that will function in your marriage, in your workplace, in your community, in your school, everywhere you go, in your church and in your home group. Everywhere you go, that dynamic will be at work. Oh, may God grant me the skill of developing forgiveness in bucket loads, that I too, when people see my imperfections, might treat me with grace and with mercy. Now, Al, what you just said, that might be okay for you because you're a middle-class dude. You grew up with middle-class parents. Yes, I did. And I grew up in a nice suburb. I grew up in Baldwin. I went to Baldwin High School. So I've had a middle-class experience all my life. Yeah, it's okay for you, Al. But what about the people that have really had a bad go in life, Al? What are they supposed to do, eh? Well, the reality is I didn't have that much of a hill to climb when it came to do this, because while my parents were imperfect, they were just wonderful. They were just basically wonderful. But there'll be some of you sitting here that if you were totally honest about it, the reality is that you lived perhaps with an absent parent. Maybe one of your parents either emotionally or physically just left the scene. And they're like a hole in your life. And you've suffered because of that. Or perhaps you grew up in a situation where parents were neglectful. You weren't fed properly, clothed properly, your needs weren't necessarily taken care of the way they should have been. It might be you grew up with a flawed parent. I am married to a woman who grew up with a flawed parent. Helen's mother died when she was 8. Her father became a functioning alcoholic. and she grew up in the home of a functioning alcoholic. I see the fingerprints of that on her life to this very day. That's been her experience. She's got an extraordinary testimony that goes to the core of our woman-to-woman course of how she worked her way through that and the impact that that had on her life. It may be that some of you had abusive parents, and every now and then you'll meet someone whose parents were downright evil. They treated you in what they were outrageous. What are you going to say to them, Al? What are you going to tell them? Exactly the same thing. You see, the spiritual issues don't change because of the height of the mountain you have to climb. It's not a different mountain, same mountain as mine. Mine's lower than yours, and I'll help you climb it if you need it. But you got to understand the deal. You don't get to sign off and say, I don't have to climb that mountain because you don't understand how bad my parents were. Oh, yes, you do. You need to climb that mountain. So, well, I got nothing good. There's nothing good ever happened to me. Really? Is that right? Nothing good came out of your parents? You did.
Come on.
You did.
Come on.
You have a life. Do you realize how heavy that is?
Yeah.
That you are a human being and you have a life because your parents lived?
Yeah.
If they hadn't lived, you wouldn't be here. And if you were not alive, the miracle of Christ and his kingdom would be lost on you. Because he came for people. He didn't come for empty chairs. He came for real people.
Yeah.
And if you are alive and you have a life, then everything Christ ever died for, the future stretches out before you. The forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, the life everlasting stretches out. It may be you have survived the worst that life can throw at you, but you made it through. Good on you. Well done. Don't blow it now. Do not blow it now by being baptized in lemon juice for the rest of your life. Now you need to realize the privilege of the fact that you have been given a life. Let me read to you something that was written by Dallas Willard in his discipleship books. He says this: if you do not deeply appreciate the weight of the fact that you have been given the gift of life, you are condemned to despising yourself, for you are the life they created. If you never press through your disrespect or your rejection of your parents and who they are, there will be a similar disrespect for yourself. God today, he may have brought you here because this is the mountain he knows you need to climb, and you need to start today. You need to simply be able to say, God, I get it. I'm hearing that. I have been hurt. I've been damaged, and I want you to help me. By the grace of God, it starts today. But maybe most of you aren't quite there.Maybe you're like me. You haven't got that big a hill to climb, but you still have to climb the same hill. And I want to tell you, the fact is that I grew up in a good home, and my mother was nearly perfect. Mums are like that. At least mine was. Lots of mums are like that. Dads can be more problematic. And my dad wounded me in two different ways. He didn't mean to, but he did. Firstly, if I disappointed my father, he never coached. He never came back and processed that and helped me build a good relationship with him. The first time I ever watched, if I let my dad down, he'd go silent. He wouldn't say anything. I just realised I'd hurt my father, and then there'd be a void, nothing. And the first time I ever experienced this was when I was 4 years of age. My dad built a kite. We built it in the backyard. It was fun. We went over the park and we flew it. That was fun. Monday morning, Dad goes off to teach school. I'm 4 years old. I don't teach anything. I stay home. I'm bored. Well, I'm going to try fly the kite. Well, I can still picture the day in my mind. And the gum trees are roaring with the wind, and the sky's black, and the clouds are scudding. This is not a day to be flying a kite. But I had a crack at it, and I wrecked the kite. And when Dad came home and saw the pile of string and the wrecked kite, a sad look came over his face. He never said a word. We never fixed the kite, and we never flew it again. And all I could do as a 4-year-old was feel like I've done the wrong thing. What do you do about that? I don't know. I'll tell you an extraordinary thing. The first time I ever mentioned this story in my own church, one of my staff came up to me and said, Al, do you realise you do that to us? I said, what? He said, the silent thing. He said, you don't yell at people when they mess up. You just look pained in your face and you start watching the carpet. I said, I don't do that. He said, no, honestly, you do. I said, oh, you're sacked. That didn't happen. I mentioned a story from the age of 4. Now, why am I telling it? Because I felt it, but I'd never really processed it. Because, see, there was a hole in my life. Kids, when they let you down, they need coaching. And they need to have the connections built again. It just never happened. God had to give me a second father in my senior minister, Hal Oxley, in order to partly repair some of that damage from the relationship with my dad. The other thing that would happen with my dad is that if he didn't go silent on me, he might blow up in my face. And the worst belting I ever got from my dad was for buying a bicycle tube. 14 years old. I've got my own job and my own bike. I got a puncture in the front tyre, decided to buy another tube instead. And when my father heard that I had bought a bicycle tube, instead of fixing the old one, he tore a branch off a tree and thrashed me with it. Now, that wounded my relationship with him because I could never have imagined that buying a bicycle tube would lead to a thrashing. Now, I'd done a lot of stuff that could have led that way, but not that. I mean, I didn't get it. I mean, it's my bicycle, my money, my job. I buy a bicycle tube, I get belted for it. What's that about? Dad, you're freaking out, man. What's the problem, buddy? I'm not smoking the tube, Dad. It's not margarine, Dad. It's a bicycle tube. It damaged my relationship with my father. And as a result, I just never really loved my dad. And that's a challenge when you carry that into your life. Now, let me quickly tell you 3 things that actually helped. We've gone longer than I should have, but I'm nearly done. The first thing is a treasure hunt. Honour your father and your mother. Go looking for some good stuff. I tell you where I learned it. Now I'm in full-time ministry, in my 30s. I'm in my office one day and there's a woman I'm counselling, and it seemed like as she told me her family stories, there was nothing good about her family. So I asked her a question. Did nothing good ever happen in your family? And she finally dredged up something, and we wrote it down on the piece of paper. And I said, well, let's see if we can find another one. And the more good things we found, the more she remembered of what was that. She was just crossing it all off, just discounting it. And by the time we got to the bottom of that page, she had a totally different view of her family. And as she left my office in a totally different frame of mind, I sat there realising I've never done that with my own dad. And I got out a piece of letterhead paper, church letterhead paper, and I started to write a letter to my dad. Dad, I just want to honour all the good stuff that is in my life because of you. And as I started to write, I had a revelation of what a graced man I really was. See, my father loved my mother. I cannot tell you what that has meant for my life. I never heard my father say a rude word to my mum in my life. The idea of divorce is unthinkable in my frame of reference because I couldn't have imagined it in our family. I mean, Helen and I have never contemplated divorce, although murder has been discussed on more than one occasion, but never divorce. Why? Because my dad loved my mum. He marked my heart. He was faithful. He was full of faith. He was just so relentlessly committed to his family and to his teaching and to his students and to our church and to the local orphanage. He was just a good man in every way. And the more I wrote, the more I realised I had been the beneficiary of a great life. And the last thing I said at the bottom of my page was, Dad, whatever stability I have in my life, I owe that to you. And I sent it off to my dad. Now, my dad never mentioned the letter. We never talked about it. Later on, my mum would tell me that when he received the letter, he'd been in a bad mood for 3 days. He saw the letter, it just brightened up his heart. He wanted to run down the street, buy a picture frame and frame it and hang it up on the wall in the kitchen. Mum said, you can't do that with personal letters. But it seemed to him, it was like him as a note from God, because it was on church letterhead paper, you know. Note from God, you're a good man. But let me tell you the outcome. I fell in love with my father. I didn't have to discuss that with him and give some great story about forgiveness. I just realised what a blessing I let it be as good as it really was. And as I did, I just overflowed with gratitude. And from that moment, whenever I met my dad, I'd put my arms around him and I'd kiss him right on the face. And he never knew what to do with that. He'd be the little... I think he liked it. Have you ever done a treasure hunt and someone you're struggling? Might be your husband or your wife. Do a treasure hunt. Let the good stuff be as good as it is, and let gratitude begin to rise. Oh, it's an amazing antidote to poison, a problem. Second thing, we often don't know the stories that have made people the way they are. One day Helen said to me, you've got to take your dad home and get him to tell you all his stories about his childhood, because you don't know most of them. You don't know what your parents went through. You don't know what formed them as they are. Often they just don't talk about it. So I took him home. He showed me the school where he had been raised. He told me about the time he got a brown paper bag, filled it up with sheep droppings, took it to school and told everybody they were aniseed balls. I understood some of my own naughtiness right there. You catch it from your parents. He showed me a dam where one of his friends had drowned as a teenager. Dad always used to freak out when we were around water. He just said, cool it, Dad, get a grip. He lost a friend. He showed me a little white house where his mum had raised 9 children virtually as a single parent. He showed me where he used to herd cows each morning for the guy to milk them, and then he'd herd them again after school in the afternoon, and he'd get paid a penny a week, and how he would take the penny home and give it to his mother, because all the kids were just bringing their pocket money home to help the family survive. Do you know what? When I heard that story, for the first time, I understood the belting I got over the bicycle tube. I realised I had a very different life to my dad. He was raised during tough times, and every penny went to Mum. And I got raised in the 60s where you could have your own job, spend the money on double lime malteds with a big scoop of ice cream. Now, I could have done a number on that. I could have gone to my dad at the end of that day and said, Dad, the Spirit of the Lord has revealed something to me today. Spirit of the Lord revealed to me that when you were a child, this demon of poverty gripped you. And the devil got your soul and twisted it out of shape. And then inflicted that upon me as an innocent child. So that I bought a bicycle tube and you near beat me to death with a stick. But today, the Spirit of the Lord is flowing like a river through my soul. And I am overwhelmed by a spirit of generosity and the magnanimity of forgiveness. And today I want to release you from all the sins and iniquities with which you have ever offended. Oh, give it a break. I didn't have to do any of that nonsense. I just had to hear the story and realise my dad had walked in different shoes to me. And while I never understood it when I was 14, I understood it later. And all I did was love him. One last thing. Do you understand anything about the background of the person you're struggling the most to relate to? Oh, I'd love to tell you some other stories, but I have no time. Come to the marriage seminar next time, I'll tell you some more stories. Last thing, do you understand people can only be who they are? They can't be everything. They can only be something. People have a wiring. They can only be who they are. Now that means that for some kids in a family, you miss out on stuff because you would have liked your parents to be different and then they would have met all your needs. It's why when you hear family stories, often you hear the stories of kids and they've got very different experiences of exactly the same home because they had different needs and the parents can only be who they are. Well, I wish my dad had been more of a coach and more of a communicator and not quite so severe. But the reality is he had a wiring. And I never really understood it until I heard my brother tell me a story. He said, Al, I was talking to Dad the other day about the Second World War. And he got to a point in his story where he told me about how one of his friends had got shot in the head. And when he got to that point, he just stopped talking. And I realised after a while he wasn't going to say anymore, so I got up and I left the room. I came back 20 minutes later and Dad was sitting in exactly the same place, silent as a mouse. Tears were just streaming down his face. And in that story, that's a picture of my dad. When things distressed him, he didn't talk them out. He went on the inside and he dealt with them there. Now, I've got to tell you, that was not helpful for me. I needed someone who could explain things. And he just didn't do that. But he could only be who he was. And so God had to give me someone else. Gave me a woman who won't stop talking. She's amazing. It's okay. We can discuss that when we get home, darling. God loves you. He brought you to this house today to give you this word. You can be a success everywhere you go in life because God has wisdom in the struggle to relate well to imperfect people. Just learn to let the good stuff be as good as it really is and add to it gobs of gratitude. Let the bad stuff be as bad as it is. And you don't have to talk about it all the time. Sometimes you do. And when you have to talk about it, use kind and gracious words to communicate what does need to be communicated. You don't have to pretend it's not there. But then add to that gobs and gobs of radical forgiveness. Because there is a Savior who knows that you too are an imperfect person. He died on a cross so that the God who is the Holy One of heaven and earth, the Holy One of eternity, could look at you as righteous from one end of eternity to the. He could wash your sins away and treat you as if you were perfect. And if God can do that for you, Jesus said, you've heard it was said by them of old time. That's not the passage I want. I want to use this one. The Old Testament. You shall love one another as I have loved you. The Good Samaritan. Love like the Good Samaritan? No. Love like I have loved you. I lay my life down for you. Lay your life down for one another. Love one another like I've loved you. And in that atmosphere, everywhere you go in life, you can prosper. Father, I stretch out my hands over these people today. You know the struggles. You know the ones who right now have tears in their eyes because they know they've got a hill to climb. I thank you for them. Thank you for having them here today.